Elias, a seasoned fisherman with decades of experience at sea, thought he'd seen just about everything. But on a recent fishing trip, he came across something completely unexpected, an island that wasn't marked on any of his maps. He felt a strange mix of excitement and unease as he decided to take a closer look. Just moments after stepping onto the shore, his face went pale. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone to call 911, but the call wouldn't go through. A quick check confirmed it. No signal at all on this island. He stood there for a moment, torn between two choices. He could turn around and leave right away, or stay and try to figure out what was going on. Normally, Elias would have gone with the first option, but today, something in him was curious, restless even. He decided to stay close to the beach and have a quick look around. That way, he could run back to the boat if needed. Whatever he'd found here, it had shaken him. It wasn't something he could easily explain. In fact, it looked like something straight out of a movie. But this wasn't a movie. This was real. His gut told him, "Elias, it's not safe to stick around." And yet, a part of him didn't want to walk away just yet. He'd been craving an adventure for a while now, and maybe, just maybe, this was it. As he scanned the area, a feeling started to creep in. He might not be alone here. But that wasn't even the worst part. What really got to him was the fact that he'd never noticed this island before. He'd sailed through this area more times than he could count. How could he have missed it? Just then, he felt something snap beneath his boot. Probably a stick, he thought, but when he looked down and saw what it really was, a chill ran through him. It was a bone. He had no idea if it was human or animal, but one thing was clear. It wasn't normal. "Okay, that's it. I'm out of here," he muttered. He turned back toward his boat, ready to leave this place behind. But as he walked, something made him stop. The sky had turned darker, and strong winds had started pushing waves across the water. A storm was on its way. Elias's old boat wasn't built for this kind of weather, and he knew it. If he set off now, there was a real chance he wouldn't make it back in one piece. He really didn't like the idea of spending more time here, but getting caught in a storm at sea felt even worse. He was a strong swimmer, sure, but not strong enough to make it home without rest. So the choice was clear. He had to stay. As rain began to lightly fall around him, Elias looked back at the forest behind the beach. There was no shelter out here in the open. If the downpour hit hard, he'd need cover. And soon. With a long sigh, he shook his head and mumbled, "Why did I have to get myself into this? I wanted an adventure." "Well, here it is," Elias muttered as he stepped closer to the edge of the forest. He had no idea what or who could be hiding in there, but after what he'd just seen on the beach, he knew it wasn't safe. Thankfully, he'd brought his knife. It wasn't much, but just holding it made him feel a little more secure, like he had some way to defend himself if it came to that. With a steadying breath, he stepped into the trees, silently hoping he'd make it out in one piece. As he walked deeper in, trying to find somewhere to wait out the storm, he couldn't help but notice how beautiful everything was. Strange, colorful plants and flowers surrounded him, and for a moment they made him forget all about the creepy discovery he'd made just minutes earlier. But the deeper he went, the more he remembered why he was here. Eventually, he spotted something that looked like it could be shelter from the rain. It was a small hut, clearly man-made, put together with broken branches and leaves. But instead of feeling relieved, Elias froze. His gut twisted. Who had built this? Were they still nearby? What if they came back while he was hiding inside? And even worse, what if this was the same person responsible for the things he'd found back on the beach? Elias stood there, heart pounding, trying to decide what to do. He could have stayed there all day weighing his options, but the rain was pouring now, harder than ever. So he made the call. He ran over and ducked inside the hut. It wasn't perfect, but at least it was dry. As he sat there, he kept glancing over his shoulder, feeling on edge. The storm was loud, louder than he expected. If someone were creeping up on him, he wouldn't hear a thing. He cursed himself for not leaving earlier. He should have paid more attention to the warnings he'd found near the shore. There had been strange-looking sculptures, rough, made of wood and rope, with messages painted right on them. Things like, "Leave, do not come closer, and go away." But the worst one said, "Stay here and risk your life." And all of it had been painted in a thick red color that looked too much like blood. The more he thought about those signs, the worse he felt. His nerves were getting the best of him. Whoever had left those messages clearly wanted to scare people off. And if they were serious enough to make warnings like that, then they might not think twice about hurting someone who ignored them. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every rustle of the leaves made him flinch. Yes, it had been his decision to stick around, but he'd only wanted to explore the beach, not wander this deep into the forest. Now he was stuck here, crouched under a makeshift hut, waiting for the weather to ease up, and feeling like he'd walked right into a trap. He felt like easy prey, and the thought alone made his stomach twist. Thankfully, the rain didn't last too long. After a while, the clouds started to clear, and warm sunlight filtered through the trees. Birds began chirping again, and for a second, the fear seemed to lift. Everything suddenly looked more normal, less threatening. But that moment didn't last. That's when Elias heard it. Footsteps. Close. His body moved before his mind could catch up. He was already on his feet, running. He ran from the sound as fast as his legs could carry him. Whoever, or whatever it was, Elias didn't want to be seen. He honestly wasn't sure he'd make it out alive if he was. Those signs back on the beach hadn't exactly been subtle. He kept going until he couldn't breathe anymore, finally stopping and bending over with his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. His chest heaved as he gulped in air. He stood still for a moment, listening hard. Nothing. Just the sound of his own breathing. No footsteps. No rustling. Slowly, his shoulders relaxed a little. But that small bit of relief didn't last long. As he looked around, something hit him hard. He had no idea where he was. Worse, he didn't know which direction he had come from, so he had no clue how to get back to the beach. He was lost. Elias tried to stay calm. He told himself to think clearly. Okay, no need to panic. There's always a way out of the woods. He took a deep breath. If I just walk in a straight line, I'll hit the edge of the forest eventually, he said out loud, trying to keep himself focused. That became his plan. Once he got out of the forest, hopefully soon, he'd search for his boat and leave this island behind for good. No coming back. He tried to keep a positive mindset, but it wasn't easy. Elias had been to plenty of uninhabited islands over the years, and he was no stranger to the rainforests in this region. But this time was different. This time, he was scared. Really scared. He'd never been lost while also fearing someone might be hunting him down. Well, there's a first time for everything, he muttered, trying to lift his own spirits. He stood there, turning in circles slowly, hoping something would stand out, some hint of where to go. But everything looked the same thick trees, the same uneven ground. With no better idea, he just picked a direction and started walking, telling himself to stick with it no matter what. Eventually, he'd find the edge of the forest. He had to, but right there, right at that moment, he made a huge mistake. He'd actually been close to the beach where his boat was waiting. So close. But without knowing, he'd picked the wrong direction and was now headed deeper into the forest. He'd probably never even realized just how near he'd been to escaping. The frustrating part? He felt like he was making progress. Determined, he pushed on, doing his best to walk in a straight line, even though the terrain didn't make it easy. Every so often, a massive tree or a small lake forced him to go around, making it harder to stay on course. Still thinking he was getting closer to the beach, Elias simply worked his way around each obstacle and kept going on the other side. He felt sure he was on the right track, even though in reality he was heading farther and farther away. After about half an hour of walking with no sign of the sea through the trees, that confidence started to fade. Then he spotted a smear of red on the trunk of a tree, either paint or, worse, blood, and his nerves kicked in again. "I can't turn back now," he told himself. "I've come too far. I must be close." So he pressed on. He didn't notice right away that the sky was getting darker. Soon it would be hard to see anything around him. But then something else caught his attention. Off in the distance, he spotted a man. Elias's curiosity sparked. Who is that? Does he live here? Maybe he knows how to get off the island, he wondered. With more questions than answers, Elias made the decision to quietly follow the stranger from a distance. He stayed hidden, moving carefully between trees and bushes, always keeping the man in sight, but never too close. Every so often he caught a glimpse, just enough to know he was still on the right trail. It wasn't easy. At one point, Elias stepped on a dry twig, and the crack echoed louder than he liked. He froze. The stranger paused, glancing around, but after a moment, he moved on again. Another time, Elias almost sneezed, barely managing to hold it in. With every close call, Elias's heart pounded in his chest. But he kept going. Something about this man and this island pulled him in, and he needed to know more. As he walked, Elias began to notice strange markings on the trees, small cuts, twisted leaves, odd little signs. It dawned on him that the stranger had been marking the forest. This was his map. Elias couldn't help but be impressed. The island wasn't on any official charts, but this man had clearly made his own way of navigating. Just as Elias was beginning to understand more about this place, the calm of the forest was broken. The man stopped. Then he turned around, his eyes scanning the woods behind him. Before Elias had time to hide, the man had already drawn a bow and was pointing an arrow straight at him. The tip gleamed, sharp and ready. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his voice firm and serious. Elias froze. His heart pounded in his ears. He was no longer hiding. He'd been caught. Somehow, he found his voice. "I mean no harm," he said, trying to stay calm. "I'm just a fisherman. I stumbled onto this island. I didn't see anyone else. I'm just trying to find my way back to my boat and leave." His voice shook, but it was honest. He hoped the man could see that in his face. The man didn't lower the bow. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Many have come before you, saying the same thing," he replied coldly. "How did you find this place? Who sent you?" The tension in his voice told Elias there was more to this island than he knew. It was clear this man didn't trust strangers, and probably for a reason. "I swear," Elias said, his hands up slightly, "it was an accident." Elias answered carefully, hoping his words would ease the man's suspicion. But before he could say much more, the man suddenly lowered his bow and moved in fast. In just a few seconds, Elias's hands were tied tightly behind his back with a rough vine. Then, without speaking, the man motioned for him to walk ahead. With each step, Elias felt the uncertainty growing. Where was he being taken? And what would happen when they got there? As they made their way deeper into the forest, Elias began to hear sounds that didn't match the lonely, abandoned island he'd expected. There was laughter, light and carefree, the kind children make when they're playing. He also heard the low murmur of voices and the rhythmic clinking of tools, like people working together. The closer they got, the louder and clearer everything became. Elias started to realize something surprising. There were people living here, a whole hidden community. When they stepped out from the trees, Elias couldn't believe his eyes. Right in front of him was a large, busy camp made up of huts and tents, all built from natural materials. People moved around, focused on different tasks: cooking, making things, tending fires. Children ran through the camp laughing, full of energy. It was peaceful, almost like a little village that had completely disconnected from the outside world. Elias knew in that moment he had found something much bigger than he ever expected. His journey wasn't over. As he was led further into the camp, everything around him slowed down. People paused to stare, children stopped mid-play, and adults lowered their tools. All eyes were on him, the stranger. Quiet murmurs spread through the group, whispers filled with questions and concern. Some looked curious, while others seemed cautious or even nervous. Elias could feel every pair of eyes on him, trying to figure out who he was and what he was doing there. Then, through the crowd, a woman stepped forward. Her presence was strong. She stood tall, her voice clear and firm. "Who are you?" she asked, watching him closely. Elias could tell right away she was the one in charge. Everyone respected her, maybe even feared her a little. "And how did you find our island?" she added, her eyes locked on his, searching for any sign of dishonesty. Elias took a slow breath and began to explain. "My name is Elias," he said. "I'm a fisherman. I've been sailing in these waters for years." He told her everything, how he found the island by chance, how strange it all felt from the beginning, and the eerie warnings he'd seen on the beach. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he finished. "I was just curious, and I planned to leave." His voice was steady but honest. He hoped they could see that he hadn't come to harm anyone. The woman studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Two men stepped forward and led Elias across the camp. They pointed toward a small, simple tent, clearly meant for him. He was to rest there for the night. As he sat down inside, Elias could still feel their eyes on him, even though the light was starting to fade. He had a roof over his head now, but he wasn't free. As the natural sounds of the island carried on into the evening, Elias couldn't quiet his mind. He lay there wondering what tomorrow would bring. Elias woke up to the steady rhythm of life around him. The islanders were already busy with their morning routines. He watched as men and women skillfully cast nets into the ocean, pulling in full catches. Kids helped gather fruits and vegetables, while others worked on tools or repaired huts. Everyone had a job, and the whole community moved together like clockwork. Even though he was still unsure about his own situation, Elias couldn't help but admire how simply and closely these people lived. The leader, after speaking with a small group of elders, turned back to Elias. "We've made a decision," she said, her voice steady but not harsh. "We'll give you a chance to prove your sincerity. If you truly mean no harm, you'll have to show it." Elias nodded. He understood why they needed to be cautious, especially here, in a place so cut off from the outside world. Her eyes held a bit of challenge, but also a flicker of hope. Maybe she wanted to believe he was genuine. They gave him a series of tasks to complete. The first was to repair a torn fishing net, something every islander knew how to do. Next, he had to find specific fruits and herbs deep in the forest, each one important to their daily life. The final challenge was to build a fire using only primitive tools. These weren't just chores, they were tests, not only of skill, but of patience, respect, and adaptability. The island, though beautiful, was not easy to navigate. The terrain changed suddenly, with steep drops and slippery trails. Thick trees and undergrowth hid thorny bushes and hidden holes. Elias had to stay sharp. One wrong move could get him hurt. Picking the right plants was another challenge. One mistake could mean poison instead of food. Each part of his test made him understand just how well these people had learned to live with the land. He didn't give up. Even with sweat running down his face and small cuts on his arms, Elias stayed focused. He took his time fixing the net, remembered which plants were safe, and struck stones together again and again until he got a spark. With each task he completed, his confidence grew. He wasn't just trying to survive. He was earning the respect of people he'd come to admire. As he worked, a few islanders came over and quietly shared parts of their own stories. Some spoke of leaving behind busy lives. Others had searched for peace and found it here, working side by side with others who shared the same goals. These small conversations gave Elias a deeper look into who these people really were. Their lives weren't just about isolation. They were about purpose and community. Later, the leader came to him with a serious look on her face. "Your final task," she said, "is to find your way back to the beach you arrived from, on your own." No help, Elias felt his stomach drop. He knew how easy it was to get lost in the forest. Still, he nodded. He was ready to try. He took a moment to focus, then started his journey. He thought back to the clues he'd picked up, the small tree markings, the bird calls near the coast, even the way the wind carried the smell of salt from the ocean. Every step was careful, every turn was based on what he had observed. Even so, the island didn't let him off easy. At one point, he nearly walked into a snake. It hissed, and he backed away quickly. Another time, he reached the edge of a cliff and had to find a new way around. There were hidden spots of quicksand, too, but Elias noticed them just in time. With each danger he avoided, he became more alert and more determined to reach the beach. Elias understood now that the island's beauty came with its own wild unpredictability. After what felt like hours of steady walking and close calls, he finally heard something familiar, the steady crash of waves. He pushed through one last patch of thick bushes and suddenly found himself standing on the same beach where this whole journey had begun. Relief swept over him as his eyes landed on his boat, still anchored in the distance. He had done it. He'd made it through the island's trials, not just by surviving, but by showing real respect for the way these people lived. When Elias returned to the camp, he was met with a mix of quiet admiration and lingering doubt. The islanders gathered in small groups, speaking in low tones, clearly discussing everything he had done. Some seemed impressed, others unsure. After listening to her people, the leader stepped forward again. "Elias," she said, her voice steady and full of meaning, "you've proven yourself in ways we didn't expect. Now we must decide what happens next, for your future and ours." There was a long pause as the group stood in silence, waiting. Finally, the leader spoke again. "Elias, you've shown respect, understanding, and strength. We've decided. You may leave." A ripple of quiet agreement passed through the crowd. A few islanders came up to him, shaking his hand or gently patting his back. The tension he'd felt when he first arrived was gone. In its place was a genuine warmth. Even the children, curious and wide-eyed, approached with soft smiles. Still a little shy, but no longer afraid. Before he could head back to his boat, the leader called him over once more. Her voice lowered, more personal now. "There's a reason we value our solitude," she said. She explained how generations ago a promise was made to protect the island, its land, its spirit, and everything that made it unique. "The outside world moves too fast," she whispered, "and it would never understand our connection to this place." Elias nodded, understanding now that what they were guarding wasn't just land, but something much deeper. As he got ready to leave, the islanders brought him supplies, fresh fruits, clean water, and fish for the trip home. But they also gave him something more, a handmade pendant, carefully carved and tied. "To remember us by," the leader said, her eyes holding back emotion. Elias felt a lump in his throat. These weren't just practical gifts. They were reminders of a people who had accepted him, even if just for a little while. With everything packed, Elias began fixing up his boat, using some of the techniques he'd learned from watching the islanders work. Once it was ready, he pushed off from the shore. The people gathered again, waving and calling out their goodbyes. The sails caught the wind, and slowly the boat began its journey back to the world he knew. Behind him, the island faded into the distance, its secrets, its people, and its spirit still lingering in his mind. As the outline of the island grew smaller on the horizon, Elias sat quietly at the helm, deep in thought. What had started as just another fishing trip had turned into something that changed his life forever. He thought about everything he'd experienced, the challenges, the quiet moments, the people he met, and the secret he now carried with him. As the waves gently rocked his boat, the open sea around him felt symbolic, like a reminder of all the paths life could take. He took a long breath and adjusted his course. The memories of that untouched island were fresh in his mind. Soon the coastline he knew so well appeared in the distance, and with it came a wave of relief. When Elias finally anchored at the familiar dock, the full weight of what he had been through hit him. The smell of home-cooked meals, the familiar voices of townspeople, and the buzz of the port welcomed him back. Stepping onto solid ground, Elias felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for making it home safely, but for having taken that unexpected path in the first place. Friends and fellow fishermen gathered around, asking questions and throwing out guesses about why he'd been gone so long. They were eager to hear wild stories of storms or sea creatures. But Elias, remembering his promise, kept the island to himself. He spoke instead of rough weather and small boat troubles, brushing past the part of his journey that had truly changed him. That part stayed close to his heart. As days turned into weeks, the memories didn't fade. Elias often found himself staring at the horizon, thinking of the island's clear waters, thick forests, and the people who had shown him trust and kindness. The handmade pendant around his neck was more than a gift. It was a piece of them he would always carry. The man who returned home wasn't quite the same as the one who had left. He had a new appreciation for the small things, morning birdsong, the laughter of kids running by, or the comfort of sharing food with others. That island had shown him how powerful a strong, connected community could be. It taught him that peace could come from simplicity, and that nature wasn't something to conquer, but to live with. Still, even as he settled back into his daily life, something new stirred inside him. The sea whispered again, calling him back with the promise of more to discover. This time, though, Elias set out with more than curiosity. He carried wisdom and a respect for the unknown. With his sail catching the wind and the pendant resting over his heart, he started a new chapter, forever shaped by the island that remained hidden from the world. If this story made you stop and think, even for just a moment, go ahead and like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good adventure. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.